From the heart of the nation's capital, this week with ABC News Chief Washington Correspondent George Stephanopoulos, live from the Newseum on Pennsylvania Avenue.
And we begin with President Obama. We met in the Roosevelt Room just off the Oval Office for a spirited conversation on several topics, starting with the president's big push on health care. Probably the most definitive promise you made in the campaign is that no one in the middle class would get a tax increase on your watch. Yet this week, Senator Rockefeller, several other Democrats say that this bill by Senator Baucus is a big middle class tax increase. Do you agree, and does that mean you can't sign it?
Well, I don't agree. I think that what they were referring to, and I haven't looked at the quotes, but I think they were concerned about whether or not this was actually affordable. If you're saying to people you got to get health insurance, but they can't actually afford it, and they have to pay a penalty if they don't get it, then that's a pretty big burden on middle-class families. That's a concern I share, making sure that this is affordable. But the first thing we got to understand is you've got what is effectively a tax increase taking place on American families right now. Kaiser Family Foundation report just came out last week. Healthcare premiums went up 5.5% last year at a time when the rest of the economy, inflation was actually negative. So that is a huge bite out of people's pockets. And part of what I've been trying to say throughout this campaign, this effort to get healthcare done, is that if we don't do anything, guaranteed, Americans' costs are going to go up. More people are going to lose health care coverage. The insurance companies are going to continue to prevent people from getting it for pre-existing conditions. Those are all burdens on people who have health insurance right now.
That is true.
And so just to close the loop on this, the principles I've put forward very clearly when I spoke to the joint session of Congress is that we're going to make sure that, number one, if you don't have health insurance, you're going to be able to get affordable health insurance. Number two, if you have health insurance, we're going to have insurance reforms that give you more security. You know what you're going to get. You know that if you're paying your premiums, you're actually going to have coverage when you get sick. Number three, it's going to be deficit neutral. It's not going to add a dime to the deficit now or in the future. Number four, it's going to start driving down our costs over the long term. Now, 80% of what I'd like to see is actually already in all the various bills that are in Congress. That last 20% is tough because we got to figure out making sure that we're paying for it properly, making sure that it really is relief to families who don't have health insurance, making sure that all the various details that are out there line up. And that's going to take some time, but I think that the effort by the Senate Finance Committee is a serious, strong effort to move an agenda forward. We've seen some positive signs from people who might have been otherwise a little bit shaky on health care, including Republican Olympia Snow, I think had some nice
hasn't signed on yet.
Hasn't signed on, but has said that this is a legitimate effort to try to solve the problem. What I want to see is that we just keep on working on it over the next several weeks.
How about a matter of first principles, though? You mentioned these premium increases, but they're not happening as a result of a decision by the government.
Right.
You were against the individual mandate during the campaign. Under this mandate, the government is forcing people to spend money, fining you if you don't. How is that not a tax?
Well, hold on a second, George. Here's what's happening. You and I are both paying $900 on average, our families, in higher premiums because of uncompensated care. Now, what I've said is that if you can't afford health insurance, you certainly shouldn't be punished for that. That's just piling on. If, on the other hand, we're given tax credits, we've set up an exchange, you are now part of a big pool, we've driven down the costs, we've done everything we can, and you actually can afford health insurance, but you just decided, you know what, I want to take my chances. And then you get hit by a bus, and you and I have to pay for the emergency room care.
That may be, but it's still a tax increase.
That's not true, George. For us to say that you've got to take a responsibility to get health insurance is absolutely not a tax increase. What it's saying is that we're not going to have other people carrying your burdens for you, any more than the fact that right now everybody in America just about has to get auto insurance. Nobody considers that a tax increase. People say to themselves, that is a fair way to make sure that if you hit my car, that I'm not covering all the costs.
But it may be fair, it may be good public policy.
No, but George, you can't just make up that language and decide that that's called a tax increase. If I say that right now your premiums are going to be going up by 5 or 8 or 10% next year, and you say, well, that's not a tax increase. But on the other hand, if I say that I don't want to have to pay for you not carrying coverage even after I give you tax credits that make it affordable, then...
I don't think I'm making it up. Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Tax, a charge usually of money imposed by authority on persons or property for public purposes.
George, the fact that you looked up Merriam's dictionary, the definition of tax increase, indicates to me that you're stretching a little bit right now. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone to the dictionary to check on the definition.
Well, no.
I mean, if what you're saying is...
I wanted to check for myself, but your critics say it is a tax increase.
My critics say everything's a tax increase. My critics say that I'm taking over every sector of the economy. You know that. Look, we can have a legitimate debate about whether or not we're going to have an individual mandate or not. But
you reject that it's a tax increase.
I absolutely reject that notion.
Let's go to Medicare then, because you also said that no one will lose what they have. And Senator Bill Nelson, a Democrat, says that the cuts you're looking at in the Medicare Advantage program are going to force people to lose coverage they now have.
No, here's what's going to happen. These are essentially private HMOs who are getting, on average, and this is not my estimate, this is Democrats and Republicans, experts have said, they're getting on average about 14% more overpayments, basically subsidies from taxpayers, for a program that ordinary Medicare does just as good, if not better, at keeping people healthy. Now, they package these things in ways that in some cases may make it more convenient for some consumers, but they're overcharging massively for it. There's no competitive bidding under the process. And so what we've said is, instead of spending $17, $18 billion a year, $177 billion over 10 years on that, why wouldn't we use that to close the donut hole so that people are actually getting better prescription drugs? Or why don't we make sure that we're using some of that money to actually make people healthier?
But he says it's going to cause beneficiaries right now to lose what they have.
Look, I understand that change is hard. If what you're saying is that people who are currently signed up for Medicare Advantage are going to have Medicare and the same level of benefits, but they may not be having their insurer get a 14% premium, that's absolutely true. And will the insurers squawk? You bet.
They may drop the coverage.
No. These folks are going to be able to get Medicare that is just as good, provides the same benefits, but we're not subsidizing them for $18 billion
So Senator Nelson, he wants to pass an amendment that shields anyone currently on Medicare Advantage from any cuts. Do you support that?
George, I'm not going to be negotiating particular provisions of the bill sitting down with you here right now. What I am going to say is this. The basic principle that is indisputable is that we are wasting hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicare that is not making people healthier. I want to make sure that we're using that money to actually make people healthier.
But if people lose their Medicare Advantage?
What I have said is we're not going to take a dollar out of the Medicare Trust Fund. We're going to make sure that benefits are just as strong, if not stronger. We're not going to subsidize insurance companies in ways that end up creating a situation that Medicare is actually weaker and has a less sound financial foundation, because right now we've got 8 years from now potentially Medicare going into the red.
Let me ask you about the broader debate around this, and you know, you've seen a lot of your allies look at this whole debate around health care and see the issue of race being injected after Joe Wilson's outburst. This week, President Carter, I know you disagree with that race is involved here, and you know, we've talked about this in several interviews about these kind of issues. You always dismiss it. So I'm just wondering, does it frustrate you when your own supporters see racism when you don't think it exists?
Well, look, I think that race is such a volatile issue in this society, always has been, that it becomes hard for people to separate out race being sort of a part of the backdrop of American society versus race being a predominant factor in any given debate. And what I've said when we talked about during the campaign, are there some people who don't like me because of my race? I'm sure there are. or there's some people who vote for me only because of my race. There are probably some of those too. The overwhelming part of the American population, I think, is right now following this debate, and they're trying to figure out, is this going to help me? You know, is health care going to make me better off? Now, there's some who, setting aside the issue of race, actually I think are more passionate about the idea of whether government can do anything right. And I think that's probably the biggest driver of some of the vitriol right now.
Whether you're going to raise their taxes.
Well, it goes beyond taxes. I mean, I think that what we're seeing right now is a part of a running debate that we saw during FDR, we saw during Ronald Reagan. Anytime there's a president